able to talk to anybody right now.
Before he became one of America's most haunting for missing children, Timmothy Pitzen was just a 6-year-old boy living an ordinary life. He lived in Aurora, Illinois, with his parents, James and Amy Pitzen. To the people around him, Timothy seemed to have the kind of childhood most parents hope for. He was energetic, curious, the type of kid who made friends wherever he went. Former classmates later remembered that Timothy treated everyone like a friend. He was always talking, always asking questions, always eager to be part of whatever was happening around him. At home, he rarely sat still. He loved riding his go-kart in the driveway, even after his father adjusted the throttle to keep it from going too fast. He played with matchbox cars for hours, chased the family dog through the yard, and spent evenings surrounded by toys scattered across his bedroom floor. James Pitzen often laughed when describing the way his son ran. Instead of sprinting normally, Timothy had a funny little waddle shuffle that made him look older than he was. It became one of those small family details that seemed insignificant at the time. The kind of detail people only realize they'll miss later. At school, Timothy was doing well. Teachers described him as bright and engaged. He attended Greenman Elementary School and was considered a gifted student. The future seemed wide open in the way it often does for children his age. But inside the Pitzen household, things were more complicated than they appeared. James and Amy had struggled through difficult periods in their marriage. Years earlier, the relationship had nearly fallen apart. They stayed together, but the tension never completely disappeared. Amy, in particular, carried burdens that many people outside the family never fully saw. She had battled depression for years, and those closest to her knew she often feared losing the thing she loved most, Timothy. Friends and relatives would later describe the bond between mother and son as incredibly close, perhaps too close. To Amy, Timothy wasn't just her child. He was the center of her world, the person she worried about most, the person she protected most fiercely. And maybe that's why nothing about the morning of May 11, 2011 seemed unusual. James drove his son to school just like he had many times before. Timothy climbed out of the car, hugged his father goodbye, and smiled. "I love you, Daddy." Then he waved and walked toward class. It was an ordinary Wednesday morning, a normal school day, the kind of moment families experience without thinking twice. Because nobody standing outside Greenman Elementary that morning could have known they were looking at the final chapter of Timothy Pitzen's life as anyone understood it. Within hours, something would happen that would transform a quiet suburban family into the center of one of the most baffling missing child cases in America. And by the end of that week, Timothy would be gone. The first signs that something was wrong came less than an hour after school started. At approximately 8:15 that morning, Amy Fry-Pitzen arrived at Greenman Elementary School. She walked into the office and told staff there was a family emergency. Nothing about her behavior raised concern. She wasn't crying. She wasn't frantic. She wasn't acting like someone in crisis. She simply signed her son out of school and left. For the teachers and staff, it looked routine. Parents picked up children early all the time. No one had any reason to believe this would become one of the most important moments in the entire case. Minutes later, Amy and 6-year-old Timothy climbed into the family Ford Expedition and drove away. It would be the last day Timothy ever attended school. Later that morning, Amy dropped the SUV off at a repair shop. While the vehicle was being serviced, an employee drove Amy and Timothy to Brookfield Zoo. The pair spent hours there. Visitors remembered nothing unusual. No arguments, no visible distress, and no signs that anything was wrong. Just a mother and her son enjoying an unexpected day together. After picking up the SUV that afternoon, they checked into the Key Lime Cove Resort in Gurnee, Illinois. To anyone looking from the outside, it appeared to be the beginning of a spontaneous vacation. The next morning, the trip continued. Amy and Timothy drove north toward Wisconsin Dells and checked into the Kalahari Resort, one of the largest indoor water parks in the country. Along the way, Amy bought clothes, toys, snacks, and craft kits. Receipt after receipt would later allow investigators to reconstruct their route, but not their destination and not Amy's intentions. What stands out now is how carefully she seemed to be creating experiences for her son. Every stop felt deliberate. Every memory seemed planned, as if she knew exactly how much time she had left. Then came Friday, May 13th, the final day. At approximately 10 a.m., surveillance cameras at the Kalahari Resort captured Amy and Timothy checking out together. It remains the last confirmed image of Timmothy Pitzen. Hours later, Amy called several family members. Her voice sounded calm, reassuring. She told them that both she and Timothy were safe. At one point, Timothy could be heard in the background saying he was hungry. For investigators, those calls would become critically important, because they confirmed that Timothy was still alive well after leaving the resort. But sometime after those phone calls, the timeline changes. When Amy appears on surveillance cameras later that evening, she is alone. At 7:25 p.m., she entered a family dollar store in Winnebago. She purchased pens, paper, and envelopes. Later, she stopped at a grocery store, still alone. And shortly after 11 p.m., she checked into the Rockford Inn, alone. No child, no explanation, no indication of where Timothy had gone. The following afternoon, a housekeeper opened the door to room 190. Amy Fry-Pitzen was dead. Inside the room, investigators found several notes. One message immediately transformed a missing child case into a mystery that would haunt investigators for years. Timothy is safe. You will never find him. Amy had left behind a promise or a warning. Investigators weren't sure which. What they did know was that the only person who seemed to know where Timothy was no longer alive to answer any questions. By the time investigators arrived at the Rockford Inn on May 14th, the search for Timmothy Pitzen was already racing against the clock. The problem was that the only person known to have been with him during the previous 3 days was gone. And she had left behind almost no answers. Detectives began where every investigation begins, the evidence. Amy's Ford Expedition was examined from top to bottom. Inside the vehicle, investigators discovered something that immediately raised concern. There was a significant amount of Timothy's blood in the back seat. Not a few drops, not a small smear, enough to attract attention. For investigators, it was one of the most troubling discoveries in the entire case. But almost immediately, there was disagreement over what it meant. Family members explained that Timothy had a history of severe nosebleeds and that the blood could have accumulated long before the trip. Investigators couldn't completely rule that out. At the same time, they couldn't ignore it either. The blood became one more clue that seemed important but refused to provide a clear answer. The vehicle contained other mysteries. Examiners found mud, weeds, and traces of vegetation, suggesting the SUV had recently traveled through a rural area, possibly somewhere near water, possibly somewhere far from the route investigators were able to reconstruct. The evidence hinted that Amy may have stopped somewhere unknown during those missing hours. But where? That question would haunt the investigation for years. Then there was Amy's phone. When detectives searched her belongings, it was missing. Nobody knew where it had gone. The disappearance of the phone immediately raised suspicions, because it represented something investigators desperately needed: a digital timeline, phone records, locations, messages, answers. Nearly 2 years later, the device was finally recovered near Route 78. By then, any hope of uncovering a breakthrough had largely vanished. The phone produced no answer to the central mystery. just another dead end. As investigators dug deeper into Amy's movements before the disappearance, they uncovered another troubling detail. Months before May 2011, Amy had made several trips to areas near Sterling and Rockford without telling her husband. At first glance, the trips seemed ordinary. But viewed through the lens of what happened later, they became difficult to ignore. Why was she visiting those locations? What was she doing there? And was there a connection between those earlier trips and the places she traveled? With Timothy during his final known days, investigators followed every lead they could find. Roadways, parks, rural properties, waterways, potential burial sites, possible witnesses. The search stretched across multiple jurisdictions, but every path eventually led back to the same problem. Amy was no longer alive to explain any of it. As the months passed, the case gained national attention. Age-progressed images of Timothy were released. Tips poured in from around the country. Most went nowhere. Some created brief moments of hope, only to collapse under scrutiny. Then, in 2019, the case suddenly exploded back into headlines. A 23-year-old man in Kentucky claimed he was Timmothy Pitzen. For a brief moment, it appeared the mystery might finally be over. Investigators moved quickly. DNA testing provided an answer. The man was not Timothy. The case returned to exactly where it had been before, unsolved. Today, more than 15 years later, investigators still cannot answer the most basic question in the entire case. Not who took Timothy, not when he disappeared, not even who was last with him. They already know those answers. What they don't know is what happened after the last confirmed sighting. Somewhere between a family trip, a series of phone calls, and a motel room in Rockford, a 6-year-old boy vanished from the known timeline. And despite years of searching, investigators have never been able to find the place where that timeline truly ends. 15 years later, investigators still cannot answer the question at the center of the case. Not where Amy went, not why she died. But what happened to Timothy, and over the years, two competing theories have emerged. Both seem possible. Both explain part of the evidence, and neither explains everything. The first theory is the one many investigators quietly lean toward, that Amy killed Timothy before taking her own life. At first glance, it's easy to understand why. Amy was the last confirmed person with him. No verified sightings of Timothy have ever surfaced after May 13, 2011. No school records, no employment records, no medical records, no digital footprint, nothing. For more than 15 years, there has been no confirmed evidence that Timothy was alive after Amy's final trip. Supporters of this theory believe the answer may be painfully simple. Somewhere during those missing hours between the last phone call and Amy's arrival in Rockford, she killed her son, concealed his body, and continued with the final stages of her plan. It would explain why investigators have never found a third party, why Amy never identified a caregiver, and why every trail seems to end with her. But then the theory runs into a problem. The note, "Timothy is safe. You will never find him." If Amy intended to conceal a murder, why write those words? Why create a mystery that would guarantee years of investigation? Why not leave no message at all? And that question leads directly to the second theory, the one Timothy's father, James, and several family members continue to believe. What if Amy really did leave him with someone? According to this theory, Amy spent months preparing for the trip, the unexplained visits to areas around Sterling and Rockford, the careful planning, the route she traveled, the confidence reflected in her final message. Supporters believe Amy may have convinced herself that she was protecting her son. Perhaps she entrusted him to someone she knew, perhaps a friend, perhaps someone connected to a church community, perhaps someone investigators never identified. If that's true, then Timothy could have spent the last 15 years growing up under a different name, unaware of the search that continues today. It's a possibility that gives many people hope, but it also creates new questions. How do you successfully hide a child for 15 years? How does a 6-year-old never reveal his identity? How does nobody come forward? Not a teacher, not a doctor, not a neighbor, not a friend. In a world filled with records, cameras, social media, and DNA databases, how does someone simply disappear forever? And that may be the biggest weakness in the survival theory, because every passing year makes it harder to explain the silence. The truth is that both theories require people to accept something extraordinary. Either Amy successfully carried out one of the most effective child disappearances in modern American history, or she took the answer with her to the grave. And perhaps that's why this case continues to divide people. The evidence doesn't point cleanly in one direction. It pulls in two. The note suggests one story. The silence suggests another. Hope pushes people one way. Probability pushes them the other. And somewhere between those two forces sits the mystery that has defined this case since 2011. Because after all these years, investigators still cannot determine whether Amy's final message was meant to comfort the people she left behind or mislead them. And until that question is answered, no one can say with certainty whether Timmothy Pitzen is a missing child or a missing victim.
Did police give you any idea on this imposter, what his motivation was?
No.
No.
And we don't want to guess at this time. We want to respect the fact that it's a child in need of help.
We have no idea why, but
The next steps for your family?
oh, it's kind of back to ground zero for us. You know, kind of reliving everything that did happen and renewing the loss one more time. You know, hard.
And forgive me, who did you receive the call from?
The detective on Aurora Police, Detective Katavu, who's been wonderful throughout this whole thing.
Jim texted me before we talked to the detective, and I don't think that he's able to talk to anybody right now.
The story this person told about being kidnapped and traded from person to person over the years, this horrible story, does this at least renew your hope that Timothy may be someplace where he is well cared for and is loved?
That's what we hope. And he did get to a loving family, and he's happy, and as happy as he can be, and that whoever has him is taking good care of him.
All we can do is hope.
Thank you for talking.
All right, thank you. Thank you for all your concern too. You've all been kind, and I know it's difficult for you to wait out here and not know anything, but we didn't know anything either. Thank all of you for your concern too.
All the
Okay.
best.
Thank you.
Most missing child cases begin with uncertainty. A child disappears. Investigators don't know who took them. They don't know where they went. They don't know who was involved. The disappearance of Timmothy Pitzen is different. In this case, investigators know exactly who was with him. They know where the journey began. They know where it ended for Amy. They can reconstruct hotel stays, purchases, phone calls, surveillance footage, and hundreds of miles of travel. And yet somehow, the most important part of the story remains completely missing: Timothy himself. Think about that for a moment. Investigators can tell you where Amy stopped for gas, what stores she visited, which hotels she checked into, what she purchased, who she called, what routes she drove. But they cannot tell you where a 6-year-old boy went. It's as if the closer the investigation gets to Amy, the further it gets from Timothy. And that creates a gap unlike almost any other missing child case. Because the mystery isn't built around a lack of information. It's built around a missing handoff. Somewhere during those final hours, Timothy disappears from the known timeline. Not gradually, not over weeks, almost instantly. One moment he's present, the next moment he's gone. And everything that follows belongs to Amy alone. No witness ever comes forward and says, "I saw where she left him." No security camera captures a final goodbye. No receipt reveals a destination. No phone call explains what happened. The story simply breaks apart. And maybe that's why the case remains so emotionally difficult for many people. Not because it's the most violent, not because it's the most complicated, but because it leaves behind a version of hope that refuses to disappear. In many missing child cases, time eventually answers the question. The answer may be tragic, but an answer arrives. With Timothy, time has done the opposite. Every year that passes seems to deepen the uncertainty. If he's alive, where is he? If he's not, where is he? Strangely, both questions lead to the same silence. And that silence affects everyone differently. For investigators, it represents an unfinished case. For the public, it represents an unsolved mystery. But for the people who loved Timothy, it represents something else entirely. A life suspended in uncertainty. No birthday celebration that feels complete. No grief that can fully settle. No relief. Just a question that follows every passing year. What happened after the last confirmed sighting? Because despite all the theories, all the searches, all the headlines, and all the attention this case has received, the largest gap remains exactly where it was in May of 2011. Between a little boy saying he was hungry during a phone call and a world that never heard his voice again. And after 15 years, that gap feels no smaller than it did on the day it first appeared.
I'd go to Greenman Elementary. This teacher goes, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "Get Timothy. He's already gone." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, so I buzz into school and I go, "My son's not here. His teacher said he left at like 8:15. Can I see who checked him out?" And they said, "There was her name at like 8:15, checked him out of school." And I'm like, "Well, I don't want you driving, just want you to make sure that you're safe." And not really. I tried to call her cell phone numerous times, seeing what's going on. No answer.
She knew enough that if she's going on the road, she needs to get this fixed.
Yeah.
So she didn't break down somewhere. And then she went to a zoo while it was getting repaired.
Then she went up to the water park up by Gurney. That's Wisconsin Dells.
So is this the second hotel?
Yes, that's the second hotel.
And how far is that?
Wisconsin Dells was probably 3.5 hours, 4 hours
So she's
away.
now 3.5 or 4 hours away.
Yep.
Okay.
Today, more than 15 years after Timothy Pitzen disappeared, the case remains officially unsolved. No arrests, no confirmed sightings, no definitive proof that he is alive, and no evidence capable of explaining exactly what happened after those final hours in May of 2011. Despite the passage of time, investigators have never stopped receiving tips. Some are sincere, some are mistaken. Some raise hope for a few days before collapsing under scrutiny. But none have provided the answer that Timothy's family has spent years searching for. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children continues to circulate age-progressed images showing what Timothy might look like today. Not 6 years old, not the little boy smiling in family photographs. A young man, an adult, someone who could potentially walk past us on the street without being recognized. That possibility continues to shape the way many people view this case. Because unlike many missing child investigations, this story has never reached a point where hope completely disappears. For Timothy's father, James, that hope has always mattered. Over the years, he has continued speaking publicly about his son, refusing to let the case fade into the background. Family members have done the same, keeping Timothy's name alive long after national headlines moved on. They have spent years living with something few people ever truly experience. Not knowing whether to hope, not knowing whether to grieve, not knowing whether somewhere, somehow, Timothy might still be out there. And perhaps that's the part of this case that stays with people. Not the mystery, not the investigation, but the uncertainty, because most parents eventually get an answer. It may not be the answer they wanted, but they get one. The Pitzen family never did. Instead, They were left with a question that has followed them for more than a decade, a question that grows older every year. If Timothy is alive, what does he know about his own story? Does he remember Aurora? Does he remember Greenman Elementary? Does he remember the last trip he took with his mother? Or has enough time passed that those memories have faded into something unrecognizable? And if he isn't alive, where does the truth still remain hidden after all these years? Somewhere out there, the answer exists. Someone knows what happened. Someone knows where the story truly ends. The problem is that the people searching for Timothy have spent 15 years trying to find that person, and they still haven't. Before we close, we'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Amy left Timothy with someone she trusted? Or do you think the truth is far more tragic? Let us know your theory in the comments. And if you enjoy deep dives into unsolved disappearances, missing persons cases, and true crime mysteries that continue to challenge investigators years later, consider subscribing. Because sometimes the most haunting cases aren't the ones where evidence is missing. They're the ones where a little boy walks out of school on an ordinary morning and somehow leaves behind a mystery that refuses to grow old.